Good morning, what can I help you?
Hi, can I order one new Strange New Worlds episode review? And we're back. That's right, everyone, talking Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 1, Episode 3. This one's entitled Ghosts of Illyria. And this one starts off with a log, not a captain's log, a log from Una, number 1, the first officer. So I want to go back, touch on something I mentioned in my review of the very first episode of the season, where it didn't feel like a pilot. Obviously, they filmed it knowing that the series already had a full season order, at least, so they didn't need to do that. So it seems like what they're doing is they're coupling off, taking a couple episodes, 1 or 2 per episode, and spending the focus of them on those characters so we can learn about them as we go, as opposed to spending a lot of time in episode 1 doing that. This one starts off with a log from Una. Last episode started off with a log from Uhura, and it seems like those are going to be the main characters of the episode when they take the helm as far as the log. So we start off on Stardate 1224.3, and they're above Hediment 9 in the Illyrian colony that has basically lost contact with the Federation. Important to note, this is not a Federation colony because the Illyrians are known for genetic engineering, and as we know from the Star Trek universe as a whole, and specifically more so lately because they really hammer home this point in the new series, the eugenics wars in the 20th century on Earth have basically set a precedent for the Federation and Starfleet as a whole to outlaw genetic meddling, eugenics, genetic manipulation, all of that stuff. So this colony was not allowed entry into the Federation specifically because they were genetically enhanced peoples. So we start off over the planet. There's an ionic storm. Isn't it ionic? Don't you think? And typical from Star Trek history, these interfere with transporter technology. So the crew on the planet, the landing party, needs to hurry up. They're down there investigating. We've got Loki here. He's going through some cupboards with a manual-looking flashlight, not the palm things we saw in TNG. So I can't tell if I like that better or worse. I always thought the handheld ones in TNG were awful and not conducive to work at all. But this one doesn't look that futuristic either. So, you know, little of this, little of that. I don't know. So basically, we find out that everyone is ready to beam up to the ship. They're having trouble, as I mentioned, but Spock is out of communication range. And Pike goes to find him and trusts Una here with getting everyone back to the ship safely. So she orders I almost said a retreat. She orders a beam up of the landing party. Obviously, the Ionic Interference is screwing up the transporters. We get our first real work scene of Hemmer in engineering, and he's trying to figure out how to give more power to the transporter because Kyle cannot beam them up through the interference. He basically starts routing power through all of the different means, letting everything go to emergency backup. So all of the power is being rerouted into the main transporter pattern buffer, whatever you want to call it, the confinement beam, all of that good stuff. It works. He's able to pull out a miracle because he's a genius. He's very grouchy, very grumpy, very sure of himself. I like that. Hopefully they don't overdo it, but I like that so far. So we get up our crew, except for Pike and except for Spock, because they were elsewhere when the transporter went into effect. So now we've got Una back on the ship. She says, I hope you're not out of miracles because we still need to rescue the rest of our team. Cut to Spock for the first time we see him this episode, and Pike finds him. They're in some sort of chamber of records, chamber of information. I guess these cylinders on the wall, for lack of a better term, seem to be data capsules of some sort of, I don't know if they're like just logs or if they're all of the records for a certain amount of time, but he's trying to figure out from this information what's going on and why the colonists are gone from the colony. In essence, there's no one there except for our team. Back on the Enterprise, we have, it feels good to say Enterprise. It's been a while since we spent time on the Enterprise. And we have Una coming back onto the bridge. We have the sweet, sweet whistle sound that we heard a lot back in the day. It feels great to hear that again. Just wanted to throw that out there. Also want to throw this scene out there because I know there's going to be a lot of channels hating on it because we now have a bridge that's entirely female. Whatever. I'm not going to complain about that because so far I don't hate any of the characters. If I hated all of these characters, it might be a different story, but I like the characters. I have no problem with characters that I like, so why complain about it? Just throwing that out because I know it's going to be brought up in a lot of conversation. So basically now we've got Ortegas, and I think her only scene in this episode, finds Loki acting weird. He's trying to break through. He's basically naked. He's taken off most of his clothes, and he's banging his head through, I'm not sure what it is, some transparent aluminum in the hall, trying to get to the sun, I think, trying to get to some light source. And she has to stop him and take him to sickbay. Now, it's important to remember, Loki here is the same guy who was on the planet earlier, so do we possibly have a situation going on with a landing party being infected with something? I'm not going to say no, because that's exactly what's happening. Spoiler alert, that's exactly what's happening. We cut over to Una in her quarters, and she starts ripping off her uniform. I'm going to just tell you right now, without, too much preamble, that yes, these crew members basically are in need of light, in need of the heat of the light, or just the light itself isn't really clear yet, but they really need to, they're basically addicted to getting as much light as possible. Then we have this interesting scene here. So she's got this little affliction going on, similar to the other guy, but suddenly she just goes up. Her whole body has this little, almost looks like what's her name? Sophie Turner is Phoenix, kind of in this shot. But anyways, so she kind of like has this glowing energy from inside of her, and she glows for a minute and then goes back to normal, and calls down to sickbay, where Mbenga is obviously the main doctor, and he's like, I was just about to call you because a hell of a lot of the away team, the landing party, should I say, is in sickbay, and they're acting weird because they're kind of addicted to needing light. And she's like, well, that's weird. I haven't had any symptoms. So she's clearly hiding what just happened to her. And then he takes some readings from her and finds out that what's going on is actually they're vitamin D deficient. She isn't. The rest of the away team is. She is not. And also he makes it clear here that there's no viral or bacterial issues going on. And even if there were, the transporter is designed to filter those things out. She goes down and talks to Hemmer, and he's basically in his grumpy, grouchy self. Well, there's no way it could have made it through the transporter, because the way the transporter works is if it doesn't know what something is, it will filter it out. Now, that seems a little odd to me, because there's probably plenty of times they've had to transport a life form they didn't understand up, but whatever. We'll let that slide, because I don't know how they work anyways. So then Una goes back to her quarters, starts looking up information on the original Illyrian colony from the Volterra Nebula, and she's interrupted while she's doing this, but basically she thinks, or we're led to believe she thinks, that there's something going on with the Illyrian genetic engineering that's causing this sort of virus. La'an comes in. We finally get a little touched on her backstory as far as being related to Khan. She hates augments. She hates eugenics. She hates the genetically engineered. At least that's what she tells us in this scene. My theory was going to be that she was actually a direct relation of Khan, either his daughter, his sister, something along those lines, based purely on her comment that her family was on a generation ship that crashed in Gorn space. I was assuming that it was going to turn out that she was on one of those ships of frozen people from the 90s, and she was actually going to be a direct person from the eugenics war, and we would find that out later. But she says here specifically, unless it's a cover story, that she is a descendant of Khan. It was hard growing up. People would, call her augment, call her bad names because of her genetic engineering. So it seems like she is several generations removed from Khan. And as such, she has not retained as much of her genetic engineering as we were led to believe. It's kind of been diluted through, I guess, it's been bred out of her. It's not genetically, it's not hereditary. I don't know how it works, but so we're led to believe here it's not as potent as a pure brand new augment. Then we cut back to sickbay, where we find out that it's not just the away team. It's not just the landing party. It's spreading to everyone else on the ship, and they can't really tell how it's spreading. It seems to be more so than just direct contact, because there's others getting infected with it that aren't related to people that have even had contact. So they initiate a level 5 lockdown. A lot of words are thrown around that were very familiar if you've lived through the last couple of years. So I don't know if that was on purpose, but it was a little jarring to hear words that, we hear on the news day after day after day. Is what it is. Cut back to Spock and Pike. I'm going to probably refer to them as Spike because it's very hard for me to dictate the two names. I'll end up saying Spike anyway. So Spike is on the planet here. He has found out that the Illyrians were trying to reverse their genetic engineering. So they were trying to ungenetically modify themselves back to a base state so that they could gain entry into the Federation. He's halfway through this scroll, this data scroll, for lack of a better term. And Spike's like, well, that's great. Can you skip to the end to find out what happened to him? And then we see outside that the ionic storm is moving in, but there's creatures. There's creatures in the storm. Or at least things that look like electronic forms of humanoid life. I mean, they're, kind of ghost looking, kind of wraithy. And they fly around a little bit, then disappear. And Spike look at each other and they're like, we kind of both saw that. Okay, we're not crazy. Then it turns out things on the ship are getting even worse. Uhura was sleeping. She was in her bunk, I guess you would call it, and it had a door on it. So that's kind of cool. It's like a little pod where the door shuts. I guess it's kind of like a coffin too. So whatever. And she hears noise. So she opens the door, and these two jokers that she's sharing a cabin with, they've holographically created a freaking sun. I mean, okay. So they're clearly in need of this light that was talked about earlier. And she's like, what is wrong with you people? And needs to get them to, she shuts it off and gets them to sickbay. Hemmer comes in. He's still his grumpy self because he, as mentioned earlier, he now has to work throughout the night to try and solve the situation, and he is not pleased about that. So he comes into sickbay and wants to examine the emergency medical transporter, and Mbenga's basically like, hell no, you're not touching that. I need it. Get out of here. You're messing up my stuff. Just leave. It's not my transporter, bud. Get out of here. So we have this little scene where he's kind of doing this hidden behind his back. And I just want to mention, I like these buttons, these switches. I like the retro feel of them. They are very original Enterprise looking. They look like something we would know how to operate today. I like that. I like that touch. He flips the little green switch there from on to off, I think. And I just wanted to point that out because I do like these classic looking, tangible buttons. Then back on the planet, Pike and Spock are being attacked, I guess, for lack of a better word. They're being attacked and the door is being beaten in by these energy wraiths, I'm going to call them, that we saw earlier. And they managed to shut the door just in time, but the storm is getting real bad outside. So I don't think the door is going to last that long, even if they are okay. So now we have Una trying to figure out the situation. She goes back to the quarters, tries to figure out why the hell Uhura wasn't, I guess, I wanted to say attacked, infected. She wasn't infected by this blinded by the light virus, and the others were. After a little back and forth, they determined, well, Uhura can't sleep unless she's in total darkness. She had her shades closed, so she was not able to be infected that way. After a lot of talk, medical tech talk, we find out that this virus is not, it's not biologic, I guess you could say. It travels on light. So basically anywhere that there's light is a pathway for this virus. It's not a virus, this infection to travel. So that's, as Mbenga says, pretty damn insidious. And now that they have a fighting chance of knowing what's going on, they decide, well, we need to shut every damn thing down. The ship goes dark. Everyone's on lockdown anyways. They're trying to fight light with dark. Interesting, because normally, in stories, light is good, dark is evil. It's kind of an inverse of that, flipping it on its head. I get it. I get you, Star Trek. I see what you're doing. And then Una is back in her quarters, kind of trying to track down a little more information on how the Illyrians heal themselves. And here is where we find out some information that might be shocking for some of you. I don't know. Una is Illyrian. not from this colony, from the main race of Illyrians somewhere else, from that nebula she mentioned earlier. She is genetically engineered. She has this genetic capacity of self-healing, and that's what we saw early on. So when she went all red and glowy, that was because she is genetically enhanced to, as M'Benga says, burn a virus and infection out of herself. So she does not have antibodies the way a normal person would have antibodies. Her body just immediately burns any problem out of her. That is the extent of her Illyrian genetic engineering. One thing I do want to touch on here. So Una being an Illyrian, being named Una, which isn't her real name, by the way, and being genetically engineered and Illyrian and naming herself Una, those things were all beta canon from like a couple different books, but they started back in 1989. So I know a lot of people have been complaining about the fact, well, like, why would you give her this name Una? It doesn't make any sense. Why is she genetically engineered? This is all stuff they're taking from beta canon and making alpha canon. They did the same thing with Uhura's first name. Nyota was also first mentioned in a book a long time ago. They finally made that canon in the show. I think they did the same with Sulu's first name, Hikaru Sulu. I think that was also originally mentioned in an older book. So all of this stuff that they're using predates Kurtzman's involvement in new Star Trek. I mean, the Una book was from 1989. They did another updated story where she was based on the Illyrian stuff in 2010, I believe. So that was right after the JJ first Star Trek came out. So they're taking non-canon material and canonizing it. So a lot of this stuff is not invented for the show. So a lot of people are complaining that, oh, Kurtzman's ruining Star Trek. Not necessarily. Goldsman, I guess more so for this show, is taking pre-established beta canon and integrating it into the show. Whether or not you are a fan of that is a different story, but it's not newly invented stuff. It's pre-existing, kind of on the outskirts of canon. So I did just want to mention that right here, right now. So back on the planet, we've got Spike and Pock. Spike and Pock. Okay, whatever. They're now doing some more of the research. Spike's like, dude, we don't have much time. They're going to breach the doors. Can you figure out what happened or not? And then we've got this cool scene where the windows are breached. They're going to die. They come to the floor, and these energy wraiths surround them, reestablish the force field, and end up saving their life. So basically, Spock's like, well, this is fascinating. This is interesting. And it's interesting. Okay, here we have the scene where Uhura, all these U names. Una decides to tell M'Benga and Nurse Chapel what she is, who she is, to see if that ability can help. It doesn't. It can't help, obviously, because as I mentioned, that she doesn't have antibodies, so there's no way for them to transfer this healing ability into other crew members. She's like, well, crap, I let my secret out of the bag and it's not even going to help anyone. Then we see La'an. She had been infected. She gets up, she escapes, she ends up getting out of there and going to the engineering place. The engineering place? Why not? Why don't I just call it engineering? And she takes down the confinement field. So, oh crap, now we're going to have a warp core breach or something similar. We have Una here. She's like, well, I'm going to get down there and stop it. We've got Captain Boner in the background there. And moving on to the next scene. Nice, cool shot of engineering. As I mentioned, she took down the containment field. Una shows up. They have a fight. I'm not going to lie. The fight looked real bad. These are supposed to be two genetically engineered masters of their abilities. And the fight looked kind of bad. Not going to give too many down points there because the fights in original Star Trek were never that great either. But it didn't look like there was a fight going on so much as flailing, I guess you could say. Una takes her down. Obviously, the containment field was down. She gets flooded with lethal doses of radiation. Both of them do. Her healing kicks in and is able to heal both of them. Not sure how that works. It does. So, what ends up happening from that is M'Benga, well, no, not M'Benga. Nurse Chapel is able to reverse engineer that and introduce it to the rest of the crew. I say not M'Benga because he puts himself under. He's infected. He puts himself under. Nurse Chapel saves the day. I like Nurse Chapel. What I have a problem with is this is M'Benga's first real story as a doctor, the first real medical emergency we've had in Star Trek in a long time, and he isn't the one to solve it. I feel like this being the first real medical emergency situation we've had in a Star Trek show in a long time, the chief medical officer should be the one to solve it. He helped, obviously, he did some stuff, but he wasn't the main reason for solving it. And I think that was a missed opportunity to show our chief medical officer in that capacity that we've come to know them, you know, saving the day from whatever crisis it is. Rant over, back down to the planet. Spike here determines that the colonists aren't here because these energy wraiths are the colonists. So they got the same disease. They ran into the ionic storm. Mumbo jumbo, something or other. They merged with the ions in the storm and basically became living lightning. Don't really know how that works. They didn't really go into it that much, but that's what happened to the colonists. So probably a combination of the ionic storm, the genetic engineering, and the virus all did some mumbo jumbo to create whatever the hell they are. And then they find this last tube here is the official document renouncing their genetic engineering so that they can formally request entry into the Federation. And then Spike has a conversation basically saying, in a nutshell, if they hadn't gotten rid of their genetic engineering in order to join the mighty Federation, they wouldn't have died. If they had kept their genetic engineering, they would have been safe from the pathogen, safe from the infection, and they would still be alive, but they wouldn't be allowed to join the Federation. So they have a little conversation about how that's unjust and that's, you know, maybe it's not for the best. As I mentioned, this is Chapel telling how she saved the day. And now we've got this little conversation of La'an and Una. Basically, La'an, as established earlier, hates augments because she grew up with the stigma of being treated as a descendant of one so horribly. Una obviously was her role model, the one that saved her, and she's like, "How, you know, you've lied to me all this time. I don't know how to feel about this. Why didn't you tell me?" They have a little conversation. They both feel a little off, but they're still friends. So hopefully that's not going to play too much into the future storylines as far as seething hatred, because I don't want to see seething hatred and hurt feelings between people all the freaking time. Then she goes to Pike, says, "I have to leave Starfleet because of blah, 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 because of my genetic crap." And he's like, no, not going to let that happen. I'm going to fight for you. If it comes to it, I'm looking forward to having that conversation with Starfleet. And now, something I've been dreading. We find out that M'Benga, it's M'Benga's fault, basically, because he did not allow the medical transporter to be upgraded when it was supposed to be upgraded. So when Hemmer pulled that emergency power earlier, the filters did not do their job because he hadn't upgraded his transporter, because he's hiding a secret inside the pattern buffer. He's got similar to what happened to Scotty in Relics, he's got a human life in the pattern buffer, kind of constantly in there, because, as we find out, his past trauma, his grief, what he's dealing with is his daughter. Yes, she was diagnosed with a horrible, horrible illness that he cannot cure, and he is trying to prolong her life, or I guess the opposite of prolong, delong, I don't know, decrease the amount the virus has to take over her body. So he has this cute scene here where he's reading her a story, because every so often he has to reinitialize her pattern before it degrades, I guess. So that's one thing I've been kind of disliking, the penchant for these stories to constantly have a need to throw in trauma, to throw in a dark story to the history of these characters. I'm not opposed to them having it. Obviously, a lot of our characters in Star Trek have had bad pasts, but I'm opposed to every single one of them having to overcome something. And so far, we've got Pike dealing with his future trauma. We've got Uhura losing her entire family. We've got Una and her genetic engineering backstory. La'an and her Gorn-infested plus genetic engineering. And now we've got M'Benga and his dying child. We've got Ortegas, we haven't learned much about yet, so I'm not sure what's going on there. We've got Hammer, who I'm assuming we're going to learn was bullied because of his Anarness. So I don't know. And B, my second problem is, why are we learning this so early on? I mean, obviously in TNG, some of our characters had bad backstories, but that was stuff that was revealed over the course of time. We're 3 episodes in and we've almost learned every one of our main characters has a horrible backstory or a horrible future, which is causing them to have doubts. So I understand there needs to be storytelling possibilities. It just seems like a bit much. I mean, I think we should have a couple model characters who aren't dealing with trauma, who are just regular people dealing with regular issues, and maybe they'll have trauma on a mission, on a landing party somewhere, but I'm hoping it's, you know, I don't know. I don't know what much to say. That's something I was worried about, and it seems to be coming to fruition. If they play with it correctly, it could still be fine, but not everyone needs to have a problem. Not everyone needs to be damaged. I'll leave it at that. Anyways, this episode was fine. It wasn't the medical mystery I was hoping it would be. The pacing seemed off. I don't know why. It seemed like the pacing was a bit stilted, maybe because it was focusing more, trying to juggle a couple of things without having much success. It just seemed off. The pacing seemed off. It wasn't fluid. It wasn't manic like it kind of was earlier in the series. It was just kind of there. So overall, I think this was a nice mid-tier episode. I wouldn't say it's terrible. I wouldn't say it's great. I think you might enjoy. You might be able to get some enjoyment out. So still have high hopes for the series. I'm not saying by any means it was terrible. Still felt more like Trek than a lot of stuff has lately, but there is still something off about it. And I hope they're not building up another season of nothing but trauma and grief to overcome. I hope we have a little more optimism, a little more fun, a little more adventure to go. So until next time, computer and program.